Hey guys, this is Evan Osborne for Answers for Hope Ministries, and I'm here with our founder and president, Jason Petersen, and I just kind of want to ask him some general questions regarding his philosophy of the ministry and why he's here, what he plans to do. So I'm going to kind of tackle these questions one by one, and we'll kind of work through them. The first of which would really kind of be the ministry in general, kind of how it got going, what you're about with this ministry, and why you have us kind of along here helping out.
Certainly. And I'll share part of my testimony too. What really got me in the ministry was when I had gotten cancer back in 2011. I had a lot of questions that I wanted to ask. Because at the time, I was more leaning towards agnosticism. And I wanted to try and get some of the answers to those big questions in life. I wanted to know, well, is Christianity really the only religion that's feasible, or are there other religions that also have archaeological evidence, like Christianity does, like maybe Islam has some?
Right.
Or maybe we can look at the Hindu religions and see if there's anything there. So I started off by looking into the other different religions. I looked at Islam, and I distinctly remember coming across an Islamic site that said, well, we don't really have any artifacts to back up our historical claims, but we should trust in the divine revelation of the Quran anyway. Right. While I admire the zeal, that wasn't very convincing for me. So I looked into Hinduism. I actually didn't look into Hinduism too much. When I read that Hindus believed that the earth was on top of a turtle, I pretty much stopped looking into that. I read some of the Quran, and when I got to Surah 3, where it said that all I could lie if it benefits them, so much for that.
Right.
Now I can't trust anything Allah says. So then I started looking at the atheist arguments. So now my question was, okay, well, is there a God at all? So I started looking at the atheist arguments, and I found them to be very underwhelming,
right,
even in my agnosticism. But it's strange though, because at the whole time that I was sort of agnostic about it, I was still I still knew that the Christian God existed, but I was kind of trying to wade through it on my own. And then I eventually went back to Christianity, and I started reading the Bible, and then it kind of reaffirmed my faith, and I started looking into apologetics, defending the faith, and I looked into the philosophical arguments. One of the first big apologists I ran into was William Lane Craig.
Right. So
I was very classical in my approach whenever I had started learning that, and then eventually I saw the videos with Eric and Seitan Bruggencate, and I started listening to that, and I didn't really get it at the time, but later on it kind of clicked. And but as I was sitting in that room, the first appointment I had at Dr. Callahan's office in Birmingham, Alabama, for my cancer, I was reading a book called Creation Astronomy by Dr. Donald DeYoung. I was looking at this book, and I was just thinking, so you know what, I'm only 24 years old, and I know the truth. What about all the others that are in my situation and they don't know about it? Right. And that burned in my heart. At the time I didn't really know what I would do with it, but I started feeling pulled into apologetics in the ministry, and that was kind of nervous for me, because I wanted to be just someone who had a secular job, maybe just a ministry on the side. I didn't really want to put myself out there, because I knew what Eric Coven and Seitan Bruggencate and William Lane Craig, John Lennox, I know what they go through.
Right.
I've heard about it, but I started debating more. I started debating more on Facebook. Some people ask, well, why do you debate on Facebook? Well, it's because I know that there's a lot of people on Facebook. You can reach a lot of people on Facebook, and it's not really the venue that's as important as who you're reaching.
That's true.
So I started debating on there, but I just felt like I had to do more. I had to do more, and I could feel the Holy Spirit just pulling me into this. I mean, you know how it is when you get into ministry. When you start getting into ministry, it just pulls you right in.
It does.
It's almost like you don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
You just can't resist the call. And then finally, after trying to make an excuse to not try and go more public or try to do something more than what I was doing, I started Answers for Hope. I started off my first blog, and it was kind of harsh. The title of it was called a Irrational Response to Emotional Atheist. And I eventually nixed that, because I eventually found the name to be inappropriate. And I said, well, what about Answers for Hope? But then I remembered at the Proof of God conference, I met Carl Kirby. He had a ministry called Reasons for Hope. it was the idea I had for a ministry was so different from similar to what Reasons for Hope had,
Right.
what Carl Kirby had. I actually messaged Carl Kirby on Facebook and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a ministry called Answers for Hope. Do you object to that? Because it's only one word different for your ministry." And he goes, "Yeah, do it." So then I went and called GoDaddy, got the domain, and I went to blogpress.com and got a blog with basically full IT service,
Right.
for a good price, and I just started the ministry. But as far as the ministry is concerned, though, there's some things I want to accomplish with it. First and foremost, I want God to be glorified,
Right.
through everything we
all
do.
Right.
But also, one of the specific purposes of the ministry, we have a lot of good apologists now. We have Rabbi Zacharias, Willie Lane Craig, we have Cy, we have, and all of them had different methods. Gary Habermas,
Right.
John Lennox,
James White.
Phil Fernandez.
Right.
We have a lot of good apologists out there. They have different methodologies, but they're all good nonetheless. We have John Frame too,
Right. Frank
and
Turk.
R.C. Sproul.
Right.
Yeah, so we can name them all. Well, not all of it. Close. Maybe.
All right, let's go.
Maybe close. Let's not try it right now.
Right.
Let's write it down. But we have a lot of good apologists now, but they're getting older, and at some point the torch is going to have to be passed. Well, I want to equip the next generation of apologists. I want to give them the tools they need. And one of the specific things that I focus on, and what I think makes our site more unique, a lot of the objections that are made against the arguments for the existence of God, or the methodology of apologetics, or the historical resurrection for Jesus Christ, are brought forth by laymen, not really the scholars, but the laymen, like people who edit Rational Wiki or Wikipedia, EvoWiki. What we have here is a war of popular culture, not so much academic.
Right.
Well, a lot of the academic philosophers and theologians and apologists don't really respond to a lot of these arguments because they're so nonsensical. But to the layperson, though, who's not really trained in formal logic or any kind of logic or philosophy or theology, some of those arguments might look convincing. Because the people who don't know, who haven't had time to research this stuff, might fall easier into these arguments. Because some of them, if you don't really know the background, they can sound quite convincing. So the ministry, what we really focus on in this ministry is answering those objections or those arguments that atheists use against our arguments. And I've gotten a strong response. We were actually featured on Rational Wiki one day.
You told me about that. Yeah.
And that sent us a lot of traffic. Thanks, guys, if you're watching. So, but basically, I want to be able to put the next generation of apologists. I want to glorify God. I want to help other ministries get started. I want to help other people become apologists, and that's why we've allowed contributors to come onto our website.
Right.
People like John Hilt,
Right.
and Ben Russell, Ted Griffith, Jessica Roberts, Ruby Faraday. I mean, we have a lot of contributors on our website, and they've been blessed. We have Christopher Cunningham. He's an avid Van Tillian presuppositionalist, and
Right.
he's been turning out some articles. So, and that's added a lot to the ministry. And as you're aware, Ben Russell's great articles on comparative religion from a presuppositional framework.
And that actually helped me develop a presuppositional framework for comparative religion.
Right.
Because, I started the ministry new to that framework and new to that methodology, and he really helped. So thank you, Ben.
Right.
So I guess to get more into specifically where you're honing in, you're going to school right now at Columbia Evangelical Seminary, which is really based out of Bremerton, Washington. Great school. You got me into thinking about going there. So kind of tell us a little about it, kind of why you're going there, and maybe kind of a follow-up, what you're specifically trying to do there.
Okay, great. Well, Columbia Evangelical Seminary is an unaccredited seminary. It's not accredited. They're very open about it. They are affiliated with an accreditation agency, but does not constitute as accreditation. And Columbia Evangelical Seminary has gotten some heat from the Mormons.
Yeah.
When Dr. White got his doctorate from Columbia, well, Columbia started off as Ferriston Seminary, and they were originally located in a little strip mall. It's an online seminary, so there's not really a need for a physical campus. And it was a 2-room office, I think, with like 2 computers and some printers and a shredder. So it was very small when they first got started. It still is rather small. But they eventually moved, and there's been some pictures that I showed, and I saw that some of the atheists that aren't very fond of me, they've been posting old pictures of the seminary,
right,
that had it in the strip mall. But now, though, the seminary has moved over to a church office. So the pictures that were there is not where the seminary is now. The pictures that show up online of it, and you can Google, you can go on Columbia, copy and paste their actual physical address, and look on Google Maps and see they're in a church now. And there are a lot of seminaries that operate within churches,
right.
So it's not uncommon. But I've gotten some heat on that. I was actually talking with Alex Boten on Twitter the other day. We were going back and forth, and one of his attacks on me is where you're going to an unaccredited fake college. Well, just because something's an unaccredited does not mean that it's a diploma mill.
Right.
Diploma mill is something where you go out and you buy your degree. There are also the other colleges that are subpar that you can get a degree at rather quickly, usually quickly, and there's just the work isn't just up to par to academic standards. But Columbia, though, has a great reputation. They've actually had Liberty University has accepted alumni from Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Southern Evangelical Seminary has accepted alumni from Columbia. And there's some others too. I think Luther Rice University did as well. And Luther Rice University is a very good school.
Right.
So if it was a diploma mill or something like that was not really up to standard, then these accredited colleges would not take those credits from Columbia. There's also some accredited colleges in Africa, South Africa as well, that would take credits from Columbia as well.
Right.
So, but Columbia, though, it's a good school, and what I'm doing though is I'm majoring in Christian philosophy. My emphasis is going to be on metaphysics and epistemology. That's going to be my area of
philosophical study.
Right, basically my area of expertise.
Right.
And I'm being mentored by Dr. Phil Fernandez, who actually taught James White for his doctorate.
Right.
So I'm very excited about that.
And we're fans of Dr. Fernandez too.
Absolutely.
So, I guess kind of a follow-up, with regards to Columbia, are you really thinking of any other schools in particular of going to? I know we've kind of talked about maybe Southern Evangelical or something like that. Are there any other venues, I guess, that you would want to go through with regards to education?
Well, there's really a lot of schools I'd love to go to, but I only will live for so long.
True.
Before I move up to the seminary in heaven.
Right. That'll be fun.
Oh yeah. Some pastors call it cemetery instead of seminary. They call it cemetery. It's a little joke that everybody has. But there are some schools. I was originally thinking of going and getting my master's in Christian philosophy at Columbia Evangelical Seminary, and then getting my doctorate in theology and apologetics at Liberty. Well, I didn't know much about degrees at the time. I was debating an atheist on the page of the battlefield. And I never realized that a PhD stood for a doctorate in philosophy. He corrected me on that, and I looked at it and said, whoa, he's right. Okay, I thought a PhD, I just never thought it really stood for anything except for a doctorate degree.
Doctor of philosophy.
But there are some, I do have options though. I really want to go to Liberty University. That's where I really want to go. But a Master of Christian Philosophy isn't going to get me into the theology program. I want to get a Master's in Divinity instead.
Right.
But I want to do philosophy. So what I'm probably going to do first is get my Master's in Christian Philosophy from Columbia Evangelical Seminary. And I'm either going to get my doctorate from Columbia, or I'm going to move on to Southern Evangelical Seminary and get my doctorate in philosophy from there. And then come back to Columbia, do my Master's in Divinity, and then my Master's in Theology, and then go towards the doctorate of theology and apologetics at Liberty.
Cool. So, segueing from this, as you've kind of studied and gone along in your apologetic over the years, and I know a lot of young guys really go through this, you've kind of developed really a methodology that's kind of your own. We know many of the greats, in the presuppositional school, like Greg Bahnsen, people like them, and Seitan Bruggencate, and then you have your classicalists like Dr. Craig and men like them. And what you're doing is you're kind of bridging a gap. And so kind of, I guess for those watching, kind of get into the flesh, give a framework about what is your methodology and how are you trying to bridge that gap, and how do you think that's effective?
Well, the first thing we have to recognize first and foremost is that God is the ultimate authority, and all other authorities, be it popular opinion from the secular community, governments, church governments,
right,
they all ultimately will submit to the authority of God. And what we notice is that when someone makes an argument for their worldview, they assume their worldview to be true when they make the argument. Atheists do this as well. They'll assume naturalism,
right,
whenever they argue against the supernatural. But we though, if they're going to assume naturalism, why should we not assume our own worldview to be true when we debate these atheists? No one ever sets out for. You never hear an atheist develop an argument for the existence of God. Why? Because they're atheists.
right.
You'll never hear a Christian develop an argument against the existence of God because they're Christian. So people don't just make random arguments. Well, I just made this random argument. Now I'm convinced of a different worldview. That doesn't work like that. When you say something like even the Kalam cosmological argument, you're setting that argument to prove the worldview that you already believe. Any evidence that we see for either side is going to be interpreted within the framework of what we already believe, not what we will believe or have believed. It's going to be interpreted according to what we already believe. And what I do, or what I think we should do when we do a debate, we have to stand on the authority of God. I agree with Van Til and Gordon Clark on this, as well as Greg Botson and John Frame, and Scythe Bruggencate. I agree with all of them on this notion. But the way I approach it is a little different. When we are we have to recognize, as Greg Botson pointed out in his debate with Gordon Stein, that not all claims of existence or truth are resolved in the same fashion.
Right.
If you look at how scientists argue, like biologists, physicists, astronomers, when you see how they argue about things, they argue differently from each other. But you find a bigger difference whenever you look at how grammarians, linguists, philosophers, and theologians argue. You'll see a difference in all these. Not every claim of truth is approached the same exact way. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we resolve the worldview issue in a rational fashion if we can't approach it just empirically, or just philosophically, or just theologically?
Okay.
What we have to do is we have to take the necessary foundations or starting points of those worldviews and test the internal consistency of those starting points, and then take the starting points and follow the implications where they lead to see if there's any further inconsistencies.
Right.
If there's an inconsistency, a good mark of a lie is inconsistency. Then that worldview has to be a lie.
Right.
I submit that Christianity is the only worldview that you can take all its presuppositions and wind up with an eternally consistent worldview. No other worldview can do it. But I've been branded by some presuppositionalists as an evidentialist because I use the Kalam and I've used an inductive argument for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And some people ask me, why do you do that whenever you can do the transcendental argument so well? The transcendental argument is basically what I just shared was a portion of it. The transcendental argument states that without God you can't really know anything and you have no standard for knowledge.
Right.
But I don't stop there. Because I have another argument that I use called the transcendental argument against ontological naturalism. This is one of the arguments I'm working on at Columbia Evangelical Seminary,
right,
on developing. And what it posits is that if ontological naturalism, which means nature is all that exists, is true, then science should be able to study every aspect of reality because the natural world would be all that reality is. But we know, though, that science cannot study every aspect of reality, and because it cannot study every aspect of reality, ontological naturalism would have to be false.
Right.
Another argument that I use, the existential argument against atheism, I basically show how atheists cannot live consistently with their own presuppositions. And when you take their presuppositions, you take the Christian presuppositions and you follow the presuppositions where they lead, you end up with Christianity staying consistent, and you end up with atheism being inconsistent or even self-contradictory. You find that what the atheist espouses is not what they live by. They have to borrow from the Christian presuppositions every day in order to live a coherent lifestyle.
Right.
That argument is the key to bridging the presuppositional approach, the transcendental argument for God, together with like the Kalam and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I use that argument to kind of bridge them together.
Right.
And some people ask me, again, I'll reiterate, they ask me, well, why do you use the claim and the inductive argument for the Jesus' resurrection? Well, if you ask an atheist what they believe, they're going to tell you they don't believe anything. They just lack a belief in God. That doesn't really give us a lot of answers except for they don't believe in God. So what I do is I throw these two arguments out there, and I will see what they think of cosmology, what they think of metaphysical realities, and then I'll see what they think of epistemology whenever they argue against the transcendental argument. And I'll also see what kind of naturalists they are, if they are naturalists. Not all atheists are actually naturalists.
Right.
So I use those two arguments to kind of flesh out the presuppositions, and then once I find out what the presuppositions are, I start attacking them. And that's kind of my methodology of how I do apologetics.
Okay. And now you've been really involved with a number of different atheists, primarily atheists, though you have dealt with other groups. Do you want to give any examples of encounters that you've had where you've kind of employed this and you found it effective in your ministry?
Well, I really started employing this first with Dr. Matthew Hunt. He's a physicist and a mathematician, and we've gone at it for over a year. We've been going at it off and on. We had a formal debate, and I made a status basically insinuating that a lot of these people are watching me and they seem to be keeping tabs on what I do. And they got offended because I was insinuating that they were stalkers. Mm-hmm. And so they all showed up on the thread in the middle of our debate, which was only supposed to be Dr. Hunt and I posting, and they started interrupting it. So then I just said, if they're going to interrupt the debate, then I'm not going to do it. And then after that, Dr. Hunt and I haven't really spoken since. But I used that methodology with him, but I only used 3 arguments at that time because I had the ontological argument. The transcendental argument against ontological naturalism up my sleeve. I hadn't really developed it yet, so I didn't use it. Right. I don't want to use a argument that's not fully developed. And it worked well. It worked well with there, but we didn't really get far enough to see how it would flesh out. So then I got challenged though on another page called The Battlefield by an atheist named Kyle Rutherford. And what's interesting is that Kyle and I kind of go back a little bit. When I first started doing apologetics, I ran into him. The first Facebook page that I admin was Christians. Right. And Kyle was a regular visitor there, and he would argue with us and about evolution and creation, and we argued back then. And then after a while, I didn't see him anymore. And then all of a sudden, I run into him on the battlefield, and he ended up, when we were in a discussion, challenging me to debate on the existence of God, which I gladly accepted. Right. And I used this tactic against him, and it was just so effective. And I had presuppositionalists messaging me and said, "Whoa, you are using both these arguments, and it's working. You're using both the presuppositional and the classical arguments together, and it's working. They're not really interfering with each other." Because oftentimes when you see people try to use both, they'll end up getting the two methodologies will get in each other's way. Right. But the way I was using it, that was very fluent. Right. It was like one whole apologetic instead of 2 separate ones. And I've had some atheists that still, I have some presuppositions that don't like my methodology, but no matter what type of apologetic you do, some people just aren't going to be happy with it. But I think it worked really well in that encounter with a biologist.
All right. And I guess one final follow-up. We've kind of been going into your involvement in the ministry, your education, really the methodology you're employing. I guess, if it'd be an appropriate question, where do you think you could see the ministry down the road? And what are your views? What's your vision? Where do you see this ministry going?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's not up to me. It's up to God. Right. If God wills it for this ministry to be a full-time ministry where all of us can do this full-time, then so be it. Even if I have to work a secular job full-time for pretty much the rest of my life, I'll still do the ministry. Right. Where I would like to see it go personally, I can answer that. I like to do kind of what like Reasonable Faith and Alpha and Omega Ministries do. I want to go out and have formal debates on stage with other academics on topics such as the existence of God, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is atheism a logically coherent worldview, those kind of topics. I don't really plan myself to be fully involved in the creation portion of the ministry. I think we're going to try and let Chris McCann, our vice president, take the reins on that portion. I'm a philosopher, I'm not a scientist. I have a passing interest in science, but I'm no means an expert on science. So I'm going to be focusing more on the philosophical aspects of the debate between Christianity and atheism. That's where I'm really going to focus in. And I know you are going to be doing comparative religion and theology.
Right.
So I think we have a strong team, and I think once we get all our credentials laid out, we will, I think people will appreciate that, and I think we'll be able to maybe feasibly do this full time.
So now that we've kind of covered everything, we really went into, how you got started in the ministry, how it really got going, kind of how you're furthering your education and the methodology you've been in really getting at and developing. I guess my last question would be, where do you see the ministry going? What are your plans for the ministry?
Well, it's not really up to me.
Right. Agreed.
It's up to God. But I'll tell you what I personally would like to see the ministry go, Lord willing. One of the things I'd like to do are things like what Alpha Omega Industries and Reasonable Faith do, having academic debates and with other people in academia who disagree with us. I'm going to be focusing mainly on the philosophical portion of the debates. I'm not really a scientist. I'm not an expert in science, nor do I claim to be an expert. I do know my way around creation science and secular science because, as you know, I was a theistic evolutionist not too long ago. So I kind of have I have knowledge on both sides, but I'm not an expert like what other people like maybe Dr. Hunt or Kyle, the biologist, have debated. I would consider them to have more expertise in science than I would. I think since my expertise is in philosophy, I think that's where I really should focus my efforts on. We have Chris McCann, who's going to be going into physics. That's what he's currently considering doing for his next degree.
Right.
After he finishes his current one in teaching, which I think will be valuable, and I know he'll be working a lot on defending the creation worldview there. And then we have you, of course, who's going to do theology and comparative religion. And you're going to be focusing on Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Muslims, basically. I think those are the big three that you really...
Those are the three primary religions because they have a lot of meat to them.
So I think we have a pretty solid team, and I'm sure that there'll be others that come on as well along the way. But I would like to not just be an online ministry resource. I'd like to go out and do conferences.
Right.
I would like to raise money for other organizations. I would like to help other apologists get started. Because I know one thing hard about doing apologetics ministry is how do you start. Well, if I can figure out how to get mine started, successfully, I can help others do the same. I think the more ministries we have for apologetics, the better. It's not a competition. It's we're all on the same team.
Right.
I also would like to see the YouTube portion of our ministry take off as well.
Sure.
And we have some exciting revamps for our website that will be coming up in the next couple of months, hopefully, that I think will help advance our YouTube videos more. But one of the big things I want to do, I want to go up to the fundraising portion. Once we are filed as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Florida. This week I'm going to be trying to file for the national nonprofit corporation. Then we're going to go for 501c3 and and one of the first things I want to do when we go 501c3, I want to raise $150,000 to possibly restart the FAST project. That creation had long ago. It looked very promising, but had to stop due to lack of funding. I'd like to restart that. If I recall correctly, I was looking at when I was researching into possibly doing this. I was looking into the rate group and what their expenses were, and the expenses for rate group were actually cheaper than I thought they were. I thought it'd be millions of dollars, and it seemed like their operating budget for just like a couple of their projects together seemed to be like $150,000. So I think $150,000 would be a good number to restart the FAST projects for the creationists and kind of advance that. One thing I really would love to do, my ultimate thing, I would love to get a seminary or university started that teaches younger creationism and that teaches good Christian philosophy, that teaches the conflict of worldviews, the authority of Scripture. I'd like to have something like that started. I don't know if it's ever going to get that big or not. That'd be one thing I'd really like to do.
All right. I think that covers everything we wanted to do. So thank you, Jason. And that's everything really for us on this video. So thank you for watching, and we'll catch you later on our other videos.